Hey, Dr. Alan Christianson here with you. So can Hashimoto's be reversed through diet? If you search that topic, you'll actually find a lot of blogs saying that it cannot, that you cannot reverse thyroid disease with diet, that it's impossible. And let's talk about this. There are a lot of people who anecdotally say that they have, and there actually are clinical trials that have been done on this question as well. And we'll talk through both of those here. So for starters, briefly, what are we talking about? So what is Hashimoto's? So Hashimoto's is an immune attack against the thyroid, and that can coexist with hypothyroidism. One can have either of those things, both of those, or of course you can have neither too. And Hashimoto's is when the immune system is going after portions of the thyroid. If that results in enough damage, it may render the thyroid unable to work adequately, making it unable to make enough hormone. And that can then lead to hypothyroidism. Now, other things can cause hypothyroidism. However, most hypothyroidism is caused by Hashimoto's. So the two overlap a lot, but they are distinct. And the question is, how do you know if you have Hashimoto's? Well, we know that it's there if there's measurable elevated thyroid antibodies. So a couple of things within the thyroid include thyroid peroxidase and thyroglobulin. Thyroid peroxidase, that's an enzyme, and it converts iodide in an inactive state to iodine, like INE, the more active state. And then thyroglobulin is the protein on which iodine attaches. So Hashimoto's is measured by immune attacks against these, by anti-thyroglobulin and anti-thyroid peroxidase antibodies. Now, here's the thing. They're often there with Hashimoto's, but not always. So many people have Hashimoto's, but don't have those antibodies measurable. And in those cases, you would know about that via findings on ultrasound. So when someone's talking about reversing Hashimoto's with diet, so we talked about what Hashimoto's is, and diet's kind of a straightforward term, but what does it mean to reverse? So I hear this used in two different ways. Some people mean that, and I should back up one more step. So back to Hashimoto's and hypothyroidism. Most people who talk about this are talking about them collectively. They often have both. They often have hypothyroidism, maybe they're on medication for it, and they have high measurable thyroid antibodies. So when they talk about reversing Hashimoto's, some talk about their antibodies going down to a lower level or to non-measurable. Some people talk about hypothyroidism going away, and some talk about both. So there's three levels to that. And the highest win would be to have your antibodies go down, have hypothyroidism go away, and not need thyroid medication. So yeah, there's different ways of talking about reversing it. And as we talk through different claims, different studies, they've used different definitions. So I'll do my best to clarify which one I'm referring to at a given point in time. Now, a really important thing to be aware of is, does Hashimoto's ever go away on its own? And there's really clear evidence that nearly all versions of chronic thyroid disease, there's a rate greater than zero of people just getting better, doing nothing special. They go and retest and, oh wow, that's not there anymore. Cool, it happens. How often is that? The numbers do vary, and it depends a lot on the population, the age group you're looking at. There's not a hard and fast number, but it ranges from 20 to 30%. It's a substantial number. And here's why I bring that point up right now. Because that number is a heck of a lot more than zero, there's a lot of people who have thyroid disease and don't do anything special and get better. And therefore, you can also conclude a lot of people with thyroid disease might try something that's not really helpful, but they got better just by luck. Let me just expand upon that point slightly if it's not clear. Let's say that a claim was made that wearing blue socks on every Tuesday will cure your thyroid. Well, no, it won't. There's no way that the blue pigment on socks in the day of the week, it's silly, right? But let's say that for a population, the rate of spontaneous recovery is 20%. And let's say that you got 1,000 people you're tracking. And of those 1,000 people, so that means that 20%, so 200 of them should be expected to get better purely randomly. And let's say that some people in that group of 1,000 heard the whole blue socks message, and they religiously started doing the blue socks on Tuesday trick. Well, there's going to be some overlap between people wearing blue socks and people getting better. And for those to whom that overlap applies, it's going to be hard to convince them otherwise. They said, hey, yeah, I was trucking along, thyroid problems, started doing my blue socks like I was told, and I was better. That's just all there was to it. And their experience was real, and the fact they got better was cool. But the real interesting question is, would they have likely gotten better anyway? Or did the blue socks work better than just randomness? So if you had another 1,000 people that didn't do blue socks and 200 got better, and of the 1,000 that did blue socks, 200 got better, we're happy for them, but it was probably just luck. It probably wasn't the blue socks that got them better. Now let's say that, those that were the blue socks, 800 got better. That's 4 times more than random. Now we can talk about causality. But just to say somebody somewhere wore blue socks and got better, that's not convincing evidence that blue socks reverse thyroid disease. And there's a lot of people in the world who are online trying to figure this out and trying various things. And so you got to figure that a certain number of people who say that I did XYZ and I got better, some of the times that it won't be that XYZ made them got better. Their experience is true. They did do XYZ and got better, but XYZ is probably not why they got better. And we want to know why they got better. We want to know what will work, what's most likely to work. Not what might work sometimes randomly by luck, but what's most likely to help you. And that's why we'll start talking about clinical trials, not just did somebody somewhere say that diet X helped me. And I got to share with you, I get frustrated when I hear people say, everyone's different, you got to figure it out for yourself. Now, there's something noble behind that. And the noble part is like, you are in charge of your health and you can choose what you wish to do. And that's true. No one can take that away from you. And it's also valid that your experiences matter and the things that make a difference for you personally, that matters. That's totally valid. But think about this thing like product reviews. I just bought a new toaster the other day. We've had one that it's honestly really slow and it's pretty unpredictable, and I make my homemade bread and it doesn't even fit the slices properly. And when I ordered that, I could have said, everyone needs to figure out their own toaster for themselves, right? I could have just said, well, here's 50 toasters available. I'm just going to buy the first one I see, and if I like it, great. If not, I'll buy the second one I see. That's not how we do things, is it? No, we look at reviews. And it's possible that the toaster that has really bad reviews, maybe I would love that toaster. That's not impossible. And it's also possible that the toaster that has phenomenal reviews, maybe I'll get one version of it that didn't work well, or maybe I won't like it for some reason. That's possible, but that's not likely. And we understand probabilities in this scenario. We understand that the toaster that has the most high reviews is the best odds of being one that I will like. And that's the one I ordered, right? That's how we do things. It's the same way with our medical decisions. So yes, ultimately, it's your decision, your choice. You have control over that. But think about this as a consumer. You don't want to go through 50 diets in alphabetical order, right? Because you're going to spend at least 3 to 6 months to give any one of them a fair shot. You want to know what's most likely to work. So enough about that. Now we'll move on and talk about what we know from clinical trials and what is most likely to work. So that's the thing. We want to know what's more than just random chance. And when we talk about data and studies and research, there's different kinds of data, and some is just better than others. Again, just like reviews. So kinds of data, there's mechanistic models. There's ways of saying, I think this diet would help because it has this thing, it's good, or because it avoids that thing is bad. And there's nothing wrong with thinking about it in that way. But that's not the most convincing evidence. That's to where we start drawing hypothesis and saying something may happen here, but that's not the end of the scientific process. Next up, we think about cell studies. You can take a whole bunch of some kind of food and squirt it in a tray with thyroid cells and see what happens. And again, not definitive, but one more layer, one more piece of suggestive evidence. And we have animal studies. You feed a bunch of mice, whatever it is, give them spinach all day long, and what happens to their thyroid function? Useful, but not perfect, not so predictive. So next up, we have human studies that look at surrogate markers. That means it's not the thing we care about, but we think it relates to the thing we care about. So in this context, we really care about our health and how we feel and our long-term thyroid function. And antibody levels can be a surrogate marker because in general, when they're higher, there's more apt to be symptoms and problems. They're not exactly what we care about, but they tend to relate to what we care about. So that's one step. The next step up would be human outcome studies. So not just did a relevant blood marker change, but did people actually fully recover? Did they get all the way back to their healthy function again? And then the one more layer on that is if that study is then controlled, meaning you take a similar group of people, watch them over a similar time frame, and see what the differences are between those groups. That's our best level of evidence, is human-controlled studies. And better yet, if there's multiple ones we can look at together and see what the consensus of data is. So that's kind of our hierarchy of evidence. And a lot of the things that are claimed to be helpful between diet and thyroid function are based upon just mechanistic models or cell studies or maybe even animal studies. But a lot of the claims that exist, you guys, are not based upon human outcome controlled studies. And when those kind of claims conflict with evidence from human controlled studies, we go with that. Here's what we think may work. Here's what we actually saw happened. Once we see something happen, we can let go of all the theories and ideas because we saw what happened. And it doesn't matter what you thought was going to happen once you know what actually happened. So yeah, actual high quality human outcome studies are more valuable than mechanistic models. And when those two things conflict, we ignore the mechanistic models. That's totally okay and very normal. So first up, let's talk about what kind of diets have actually had high-quality human studies. And please know that there are many, many diets talked about that I'm not going to go into in depth in here because they haven't had any high-quality human studies. And there are people out there who have done any diet you could think of, and there's some that'll say, hey, this helped me. And there's some you can say, it didn't help me. So where do you go with that? You could put that in the pile of things to try someday if you want. But again, we got consumer reviews there. Let's look at the reviews. Let's see what's most likely to work. And let's go with our best evidence first. So for starters, I want to talk about gluten and about the whole thyroid-gluten connection. This one's gotten a lot of publicity. There's been quite a bit of discussion about this in natural medicine. And here's how that came about. There were some speculative ideas in the 90s that there was some way by which gluten was thought to be causal with autoimmunity. And here's why. People with celiac disease, which is an autoimmune disease, have higher rates of thyroid disease. And some thought, reasonably so, that maybe one of those things causes the other. That maybe if you've got celiac disease, that causes you to get thyroid disease. Super brief aside, celiac disease is autoimmune. Does that sound weird? Because celiac disease is a reaction against gluten, right? And gluten is not part of the human body. And autoimmune disease is where you react to part of your own body. So how does that all square together? Well, interesting thing, celiac disease is not a reaction to gluten. Celiac disease is totally worsened by gluten, and gluten avoidance is completely appropriate. But it's a disease against transglutaminase, which is an enzyme in the human body. So it's not really a disease against gluten. And yes, there is a lot of overlap between celiac disease and autoimmune thyroid disease. But is that a causal relationship? I mean, does A cause B? Does B cause A? Or does C down here cause both A and B? Those are all different ways that could play out. And there have been studies done looking at this question. One of the better studies done took people that were newly diagnosed with celiac disease. And the thought was, we want to see who that's been newly diagnosed already has thyroid disease. We want to set them aside. So we want to take people that have been newly diagnosed and at this time do not have any thyroid disease. We want to watch them for a year and we want to divide them into two groups. Some people, just by their own choices, will do a good job avoiding gluten. Some people won't. And we can know that objectively through blood markers. And the hypothesis is that if gluten in some way causes thyroid disease in people that have celiac, those who do follow up with their instructions and avoid gluten, they should have a lower risk of developing thyroid disease than those who don't. I'm just going to restate that. So people that now have celiac disease, if they quit gluten here, or if they quit eating gluten, if gluten somehow causes thyroid disease, those who are still eating it should get more thyroid disease than those who are avoiding it. Great hypothesis. And if that showed to be the case, that could be one more level of evidence about thyroid disease and celiac disease. That study was done. Those who avoided gluten actually had slightly higher rates of thyroid disease. Not enough to say where it was a big deal, but it clearly was not lower. It was actually higher. So this study showed there was no way in which gluten caused thyroid disease, even in those with celiac. Let's think about this. there's probably nobody out there who has more chronic problems from wheat than those with celiac. Perhaps barring wheat allergy, which is kind of like a peanut allergy. It's like that severe, but not that. But yeah, celiac disease, they are not healthier. Their body is more inflamed. A lot of things go badly when they eat wheat. No debate about that. But whether they do so or not does not have any relationship with their likelihood to get thyroid disease. So yeah, they're more likely to get thyroid disease than someone else is, but their wheat intake doesn't affect that. Now, there was one other study which claimed to talk about the effect of a gluten-free diet in people with thyroid disease that did not have celiac disease. That's how the study was cited and set up. And this study did show that people that had autoimmune thyroid disease that avoided wheat, they had a temporary reduction in their thyroid antibodies. So remember degrees of reversing Hashimoto's. There's lowering antibodies, reversing hypothyroidism, all the above. So it didn't improve hypothyroid markers. It didn't cause them to need any less treatment per se, but it did lower their thyroid antibodies for a little while. So that was maybe step one benefit. But here's a big wrinkle. This study, and this is so bizarre, you guys, I promise I've read this study dozens of times to confirm that I wasn't hallucinating this. So the study, it said, it was actually called gluten-free diet in those with thyroid autoimmunity, and it purported to say we're talking about the population that does not have celiac. But if you look in the materials and methods, they only took people in who had antibodies against transglutaminase. That's celiac disease. So they didn't have a formal diagnosis of celiac through biopsy, but they only took people that had celiac antibodies on their blood tests. Go figure. So was this really a population that was different than those with celiac disease? No, it wasn't. And they said so very clearly in their methods. And that's often held out to be the one study proving that even apart from celiac disease, thyroid function is better by avoiding gluten. But yeah, they didn't actually improve their thyroid function. They did lower their antibodies, but they had celiac antibodies as well. So there's not really a lot we can draw from that for people who don't have celiac disease. People that have celiac disease, they should avoid gluten. There's a lot of reasons they should do that, but they shouldn't really bank on that solving their thyroid problems. And another wrinkle is that it's good to screen for celiac disease on a regular basis if you have thyroid disease. If you quit gluten prematurely, you can no longer accurately screen for celiac disease. You can't get accurate tests anymore. Next up, in terms of what's gotten publicity, would definitely be the autoimmune paleo diet. The idea here is that there's all kinds of stuff in food that can inflame the body, worsen the immune system, drive autoimmunity. So this cuts out anything that is thought to be a possible offender. That's a long list. So all grains, including oats, wheat, and rice, all dairy products, eggs, nuts and seeds, legumes and beans, nightshade vegetables, things like garlic, things like tomatoes, all sugars, no worries there, butter and ghee, pretty much all oils with a few exceptions, herbs derived from seeds, food additives, processed foods, chocolate, alcohol. Yeah, all these things are cut out. So it's a pretty restrictive diet. And I don't know, some of these foods, like green vegetables, for example, or berries, or yeah, so many of these foods, legumes, have been shown to have massive health benefits, and for good reason. So I'm always so cautious of cutting out healthy foods. I'm not afraid to have someone quit processed sugar. That's totally cool. But to quit eating spinach, yeah, that's a tough one. That's a pretty tough sell for me. I would need massive amounts of evidence saying that that's a good idea. Same thing for beets or tomatoes. But anyway, this has been studied. We don't have to speculate back and forth as to whether it's a good idea or not. There have been two rather large studies done. The first one was done on women with thyroid disease, and they were put on the autoimmune paleo diet. Quite simply, there were no benefits that showed up whatsoever. No positive changes to thyroid levels, no benefits to thyroid antibodies. Now, in terms of levels of reversing Hashimoto's, there were zero. There was no changes that way. A second follow-up study was done. Check this out, you guys. In this study, I'm going to quote from the study, as a result of the AIP diet, an increase was observed in the value of thyroid peroxidase. Yeah, so their thyroid antibodies got worse. They got higher. Now, those who wrote the study, they did some discussion saying that they believed that the reason the thyroid antibodies went up is because their iodine intake went up in those on the autoimmune paleo diet. And there's no reason it would have to. There's no real recommendation to raise iodine on the autoimmune paleo diet, but many versions of it do include sea vegetables, and that can cause it to go up quite a bit. Or they'll use sea salts or pink Himalayan salts. But this study showed that the participants did increase their iodine intake, and that was thought to be causal for their antibodies going up. So yeah, 2 studies on AIP, one didn't help, one made it worse. But we're still talking about it. Okay, I won't go too far on that. Now, here's kind of a study that was a one-off. This one was curious. This was called a low carbohydrate diet, and that's fine, but it was an unusually high protein diet. It was also a very low calorie diet. So there's a lot of different things going on, and the effects might have been due to one of those more than the others. In it, the dietary intake of protein was at 50 to 60%, which is a whopping amount. And there's a lot of ways in which those with thyroid disease often are below what's ideal for their protein intake. So in this one, they got a lot of protein and they radically lowered their total food intake. Now, their thyroid function, TSH, T3, T4, didn't change from that. They did see their weight go down quite a bit. And given how much their food was restricted, that was not surprising. Their thyroid antibodies did lower, and they went down by roughly half. Now, other studies have suggested that weight loss itself may lower thyroid antibodies, independent of a healthy diet. Just losing weight in any way may lower the antibodies by a bit. And this one did cause weight loss, did cause antibodies to go down. Again, a lot of differences in this diet, very low carbohydrate, very high in protein. It did also cut out a lot of vegetables and other foods, but it didn't improve thyroid function. So it did lower antibodies a little bit, did not improve thyroid function, but they did also cause weight loss. So there is that. There was that one study. Then we have low iodine diet studies. And let's define this. They're ones that simply do control iodine and keep it to a target. So why would that help? Well, with Hashimoto's, I mentioned how there's an immune attack against thyroid peroxidase and thyroglobulin. And again, thyroid peroxidase is the enzyme that oxidizes iodine. Thyroglobulin is the storage box where iodine goes. So when there's too much iodine, these structures can become part of an inflammatory immune response. The iodine is a pro-oxidant. It is an antiseptic. So that's why it's used on the skin, like hydrogen peroxide. That's why it can sanitize surfaces like bleach. It generates free radicals. When there's too much of those in the thyroid, the body starts to attack the innate structures within the thyroid. And lots of evidence has shown this is one of the causal mechanisms of autoimmune thyroid disease. So that's a mechanism. Mechanisms are cheap, right? So what do we see from human clinical trials? Well, one study showed that people with marked hypothyroidism and Hashimoto's, I'll quote this study suggests that in those patients with hypothyroidism due to Hashimoto's thyroiditis, 78.3% had returned to a normal thyroid function with only iodine restriction without thyroid hormone replacement, and this recovery occurred mostly within 3 months. So in 3 months, they fully reversed Hashimoto's, they fully reversed hypothyroidism, and they did that through diet. You guys hear that? I see all these quotes. There have been no studies to date proving that diet can improve or reverse thyroid disease. Sorry, here's one. There's others like this, but yes, there have. Just because you didn't see the study doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. It exists. There's data like this that is out there. And I get giddy about this because it's really cool, but that 78% is a high number. But if you drill down deeper, of the remaining, 22 odd percent of people that didn't improve, there were some to where they simply weren't following the guidelines, and that was measurable. And there were some to where they actually improved a lot, but they didn't yet get into the range of normal. They had a long ways to go, and they were just about there. So if you reword that and say, of those who did follow the guidelines and were compliant and got to the target levels of iodine, how many either fully reversed their disease or radically improved it? If you word it in that way, then the new number is 97%. So just about everyone that played won to some degree. And this was a massive, massive benefit. So that's in terms of clinical trials on meaningful outcomes on thyroid disease and diet, that's what we got. That's what's been done. That's what's known. So you've got one thing that's pretty much like, I don't know, like a magic trick, like you're doing the little opening up the hat and you pull out a blue whale. It's like that level of a magic trick. And you get these other ones that were kind of duds, right? Yeah, so that's a big deal. So what else is generally helpful? So what do we know can be good, but may not have that level of quality evidence? A couple of things. So a good balance of macronutrients. Some studies have shown that if you're way off on carbs, way low in protein, that may be bad for how you use thyroid hormones. We also know that many phytonutrients, many naturally occurring things in plants, are good for thyroid function. And we also know that there's many micronutrients that we need for the thyroid to work right. Some of the big stars there include selenium, zinc, vitamin A, iron, and these are things, of course, that are relevant to our dietary intake of them. So now you know how the Thyroid Reset Diet came about. I saw the studies about what made a huge difference on fully reversing the disease, and it was written up in a protocol that was meant to be very simple and very categorical, cut out all these kinds of foods. Now, it wasn't even comprehensive. It didn't cover all the sources of iodine. It covered many of them, but it didn't give a lot of detailed guidance on how to construct a healthy diet. It just said, here's some big sources of iodine, quit those for these next couple months. And that was fine for purposes of the study. But once that was known, and once I thought about the fact that someone could do this for a longer period of time, I wanted them to have a healthier diet overall, and more options, and more food choices, and also to make sure that nothing's being missed, that there weren't any hidden sources of iodine. And to cover the other things we know that are good for your thyroid, to get adequate good fats, good proteins, good carbs, to get appropriate amounts of micronutrients. So it was iodine regulating, but it was more than that. And also I wanted to make it in a way to where you could do it at a stringent enough level to get some big benefits, but not need to do that long term. Because once you have seen the thyroid heal and recover, you've got more leeway. You can tolerate a certain amount of iodine and probably not lose ground. So I broke that down to a reset stage and a maintenance stage. So that's an overview of that. A lot of benefits, so many stories that I hear just on the daily about people getting better. If you've got Hashimoto's, if you've got thyroid disease, including hypothyroidism, hyperthyroidism, subclinical hyperthyroidism, and you want those to get better, this is the best documented diet to be effective. No drawbacks to it, safe for longer term use, and based on high quality human evidence. So to answer the question, yes, there is data showing that diet can reverse thyroid disease. It's been investigated. A lot of popular diets may be helpful for people sometimes, may have some merits to them, but they've often been studied and shown just not to be helpful. Well, one approach has been shown to be very helpful. All right, Dr. C with you. Take great care. We'll talk soon.